It headed up our parade from Ron Pratt's museum to Barrett Jackson.
In the late 1930s, America was fascinated by the future. The Great Depression had left scars, but people were beginning to dream again. Automobiles, airplanes, and highways were symbols of hope, and no company wanted to capture that spirit more than General Motors. GM decided it would not just build cars, it would build visions of tomorrow. That dream was called the Futurliner. At first sight, the Futurliner didn't look like any ordinary bus or truck. It was a massive, sleek machine, nearly 33 feet long and 8 feet wide, with a futuristic Art Deco design that made it look like something out of a science fiction magazine. Its bold red and white paint, towering chrome grille, and unique style made it seem like a spaceship on wheels. GM built 12 of them, and each was designed to carry a piece of the future across America. The Futurliners were the heart of GM's Parade of Progress, a traveling show that toured towns and cities, bringing science and technology to people who might never see them otherwise. Each Futurliner carried an exhibit: jet engines, televisions, microwave ovens, or the latest automotive breakthroughs. The sides of the bus opened like giant wings, revealing glowing displays that promised the audience a better tomorrow. Children stood wide-eyed as they looked inside. Families packed the streets to see this moving carnival of progress. It worked. For years, the Futurliners dazzled crowds. They were living billboards for General Motors, showing that the company wasn't just making cars, it was shaping the future. During the 1940s and 1950s, the Parade of Progress was one of the biggest events a town could see. At a time before television reached every home, people didn't just want the future, they wanted to see it with their own eyes. But even in those golden years, cracks were forming. The Futurliners were expensive, complicated, and impractical. Each was custom-built, with unique parts that mechanics struggled to maintain. The design, while striking, wasn't always functional. Driving one felt like steering a tank, slow, clumsy, and heavy. The narrow wheels made them awkward to handle, and their size made parking and turning in small towns a nightmare. GM didn't care at first. To them, the Futurliner was about image, not practicality. As long as the crowds were impressed, the flaws could be ignored. But flaws have a way of catching up. When the Parade of Progress restarted after World War II, something had changed. America was different. Television was spreading into living rooms, delivering futuristic visions without people needing to leave their homes. The Futurliner, once a marvel, now seemed slower, clumsier, and less exciting. Crowds still came, but not with the same awe. Some exhibits that once seemed magical, like microwave ovens or television, were now becoming everyday items. The future wasn't locked inside a bus anymore. It was already arriving in people's homes. Still, GM kept sending out the Futurliners, hoping to keep the magic alive. But the costs mounted. Moving 12 massive vehicles across the country was enormously expensive. Fuel, maintenance, drivers, staff, the Parade of Progress drained money faster than GM could justify. And behind the scenes, the Futurliners themselves were aging badly. Engines failed, parts broke. Mechanics had to invent solutions on the spot because replacement parts didn't exist. The futuristic machines that once symbolized progress were starting to look more like burdens. Yet GM refused to let go. The Futurliner was a symbol of pride, and pride can be a dangerous anchor. Instead of retiring the show gracefully, GM stretched it further, even as television and modern advertising quickly made the concept outdated. What was once the most glamorous show on wheels was about to stumble into irrelevance. And when it did, the Futurliner would transform from a national icon into a forgotten disaster. By the early 1950s, the Futurliners still looked like rolling spaceships, but the world around them had changed. The magic of the Parade of Progress was wearing thin. Crowds no longer saw them as glimpses of tomorrow. They saw them as clumsy giants, beautiful to look at, but slow and outdated in a country racing into the jet age. The biggest problem was the very thing that once made them special: their size and design. The Futurliner was enormous, and not in a good way. Its tall, boxy body caught strong winds on highways, making it unstable. Its narrow tires struggled to support its weight, and breakdowns became common. Drivers described them as some of the most difficult vehicles they had ever handled. Just turning onto a small-town street could become a half-hour battle. And then there were the mechanics. Each Futurliner was hand-built, meaning no two were exactly alike. Parts couldn't simply be swapped between them. When something broke, and things broke often, mechanics had to improvise. Replacement parts weren't available off the shelf. In some cases, they had to be custom fabricated, adding to the cost. What was meant to be a futuristic fleet had turned into 12 headaches on wheels. Fuel consumption was another disaster. These machines were heavy, slow, and inefficient. Moving 12 of them across the country was like dragging an army of elephants from town to town. Every stop required fuel, drivers, technicians, and staff to set up the exhibits. What began as an exciting promotional idea now looked like a financial sinkhole. But the real enemy wasn't cost, it was technology. When the parade of progress began, television was rare. Seeing futuristic inventions live right in front of your eyes was thrilling. By the 1950s, televisions were spreading fast. Families could sit in their living rooms and watch science, technology, and innovation without ever leaving home. The same future GM was trying to showcase was already arriving at people's doorsteps faster and cheaper. Suddenly, the Futurliners felt like relics. The exhibits that once drew gasps now drew polite smiles. Microwaves, jet engines, televisions, these weren't science fiction anymore. They were reality. What could a bus show that the TV screen could? GM tried to keep the show alive by updating the exhibits. They brought in new displays, new themes, new promises. But the excitement was gone. Crowds thinned. Towns that once welcomed the parade with banners and parades of their own now treated it as just another traveling show. The strain on GM grew worse. The company was spending massive amounts of money to run a spectacle that was no longer paying off. Internally, executives argued. Some wanted to kill the project. Others insisted it was a matter of pride. GM had built its image on being the company of the future. To abandon the Futurliner would feel like admitting the future had passed them by. But the cracks grew wider. Accidents began to make headlines. Futurliners broke down on highways, blocking traffic. Drivers complained publicly about their dangerous handling. The very machines that once symbolized safety and progress were now being mocked as impractical and outdated. By the late 1950s, the writing was on the wall. Television advertising had replaced traveling shows. New car models were being promoted on national broadcasts that reached millions instantly, at a fraction of the cost of hauling a dozen Futurliners around the country. The parade of progress wasn't just outdated, it was irrelevant. And so GM quietly ended it. No big announcement, no farewell parade. The Futurliners simply stopped rolling. Some were parked in warehouses, others left in fields to rust. A few were sold off, stripped of their exhibits, and used for odd jobs. The futuristic dream machines were abandoned like old junk. But here's the twist. Even though the public forgot about them, the Futurliners didn't completely disappear. Some would resurface decades later, sparking a new kind of fascination. For GM, though, the Futurliner experiment was already branded a failure. What had started as a bold vision ended as a forgotten disaster. And yet, the most painful part of the story was still to come. Because the Futurliners would one day return, not as symbols of the future, but as haunting reminders of how quickly the dream of tomorrow can collapse into the dust of yesterday. When the parade of progress quietly ended, the Futurliners were scattered like ghosts of a dream no one wanted to talk about. GM had poured its pride and fortune into them, but now they were abandoned, sold, or left to rot. What was once the symbol of the future became little more than oversized junk. Some Futurliners were stripped down and repurposed. A few ended up as promotional vehicles for small companies. Others were parked in forgotten fields, their once bright red paint fading, their chrome rusting away. For years, most people had no idea they even existed. GM never spoke of them again. The company moved on to new cars, new campaigns, and new promises. The Futurliner was a memory they wanted erased. But time has a way of rewriting stories. By the 1980s and 1990s, automotive historians and collectors began digging into forgotten corners of America's car history. They stumbled across the story of the Parade of Progress and the strange, oversized vehicles that once carried the future. Slowly, people began to search for the Futurliners. What they found shocked them. Some were complete wrecks, barely recognizable. Broken windows, missing wheels, gutted interiors. Others had been modified beyond recognition. But a few still carried the bones of their original glory. And when collectors realized how rare they were, only 12 were ever built, the Futurliner transformed from forgotten junk into one of the most valuable and mysterious vehicles in the world. Restoring one, however, was a nightmare. Each Futurliner was unique, built by hand, with parts that no longer existed. Bringing one back to life required thousands of hours of work and millions of dollars. But for the few collectors who tried, the challenge was worth it. Restored Futurliners began appearing at car shows, museums, and auctions. When one sold at auction for several $1 million, jaws dropped. The machine that had once been written off as a costly disaster was suddenly one of the most sought-after artifacts of automotive history. Yet the irony was impossible to ignore. GM had built the Futurliners to showcase the future, but the future left them behind. They had been a marketing gimmick, not a practical vehicle, and the company had paid the price for chasing spectacle over substance. In their time, the Futurliners were a financial disaster that embarrassed GM and faded from memory. Only decades later did they return as rare collectibles, admired not for what they achieved, but for what they represented, a failed dream wrapped in steel and chrome. The story of the Futurliner is powerful because it carries a warning. It shows how quickly innovation can turn into obsolescence. GM thought it was showing the future, but the future was already moving faster than their buses could drive. Television, new media, and changing technology made the parade irrelevant almost overnight. The machines that once dazzled crowds became abandoned relics, forgotten even by the company that built them. Today, only a handful of Futurliners survive, most in museums or private collections. They look majestic, polished to perfection, but behind the shine lies the truth: they were failures. They never lived up to their promise, never achieved what GM hoped. They became icons of waste, ambition, and misplaced pride. And yet they also became unforgettable. People who see them today, towering and strange, cannot help but stop and stare. They look like artifacts from another world, machines too bold for their time. They remind us of how fragile progress can be and how easily dreams can collapse into dust. The Futurliner's story is not just about a forgotten vehicle. It is about the risks of chasing spectacle without substance, about the cost of pride, and about how history often hides its most painful lessons. GM wanted the Futurliner to be remembered as a vision of tomorrow. Instead, it is remembered as a forgotten disaster, a giant on wheels that promised the future but ended up as nothing more than a warning from the past. And that is why the Futurliner still fascinates today. Not because it succeeded, but because it failed so completely. It is a story that proves the future cannot be built on spectacle alone. A story that began as a shining dream and ended as a haunting reminder that even the biggest machines can fall.